Okay, I want to talk a little bit about ISO and also about exposure. ISO actually stands for the International Standards Organization. It's a measure of the sensitivity of the sensor to light. It's actually based on how they used to test film. The higher ISO, the more light sensitive the sensor is, the less light it needs for exposure. So it's better if you're shooting in low light situations. But it also tends to give you more digital noise. Lower ISOs need more light, but will give you a cleaner, less noisy result. If you look at this photo here, it's taken at ISO 800 in a dark tube station with a camera with a small sensor. Small sensors tend to have a bit more digital noise. And if you look at the photo on the bottom left, you can actually see the digital noise there. The sensor requires a specific amount of light. So the photo on the bottom left is overexposed. Overexposure is bad because the highlight detail is actually gone. I tried to adjust this in Photoshop, but the doors and the fence there, or the railing there at the top, there is no detail there. You can't bring it back. The one at the bottom right is really too dark. Underexposure has caused most of the shadow detail to be gone. You could try and bring some of it back, but it will look really grainy and it'll look really flat. So you need to get the correct exposure in the first place. If you have a DSLR, the light meter will probably look something like this. So this is the meter readout. This is correct exposure. You'll usually have a row of little bars like this. -1 and -2 if is underexposure, +1 and +2 is overexposure. You want to usually get the bottom bar in the middle, and you can see the little picture on the right shows you correct exposure for that scene. If it's underexposed, it's too dark. You can see the bar has gone over to the -1. If it's overexposed, it's too light, and you can see the bar has gone to the +1. So you want to keep your eye on your meter if you're using the camera in manual. Now we'll talk a bit more about automatic exposures in a few minutes. Sometimes, even if you've got the bar in the center and the light meter says it's okay, your meter will give you a problem. Non-average scenes, the light meter is calibrated to something, so it's calibrated to see the world as an average scene. Now, if you think of the average scene, you can see there's some light dark tones and some light tones, dark tones, middle tones. Average them all out, and they come out to about a medium gray. 18% gray is the photographic standard. So if you have a non-average scene, then it will fool the meter. So the bottom left, the light meter does not know that this is a white rabbit in the middle of snow, and it thinks everything should be average. So basically, even though the meter said it was okay, it's underexposed. It's too dark. So what I did was added some light. Even though the meter said that it was okay, I added a stop of light, and you can see the rabbit is much closer to white there. This is another scene. Now, what's actually happening here is the backlight. There's so much difference between the background and the foreground that the meter can't get that whole range of tones in there. Now, the meter doesn't know that you really wanted the interior to be correctly exposed. So it's averaging everything out, and while the window doesn't look too bad, the foreground is underexposed. So this is one of those where you would also want to give it a bit more light to compensate, especially if you wanted to be able to see detail in the chairs in the foreground. The exposure triangle is a way of expressing that these three things are related. So the three things that control exposure, remember, your shutter speed controls exposure, your lens opening controls the amount of light that's getting in, your ISO controls the sensitivity of the sensor. You need to balance these three controls, and if you make a change in one, you need to make a change in at least one of the other ones. because you need that magic amount of light. Shooting modes. In program, many cameras have a program setting. If you don't download a camera control like Lightroom Mobile for your phone, it will also have a programmed shooting mode. The camera selects everything. So lens opening, selects the shutter speed, actually even often selects the ISO. So you don't have to worry about anything, but doesn't give you any control. If you have a DSLR, you can set it to what's called aperture priority. Now remember, this isn't going to work on phones because most of them don't have variable apertures. But with your DSLR, if your depth of field is important, then you set it to AV. You can set the lens opening, and the camera will set a shutter speed for you to get what it thinks is the correct exposure. Shutter priority is, of course, the opposite. We'll work with both. If you set it to shutter priority, you set the shutter speed, it sets the lens opening. And on a phone camera, we'll also probably change the ISO. We'll let you select a shutter speed, and it will give you the correct exposure. Manual, you set both. Automatic override is mostly a DSLR thing too, although it does actually come up in Lightroom Mobile. If your pictures are coming out consistently too dark and you're shooting in automatic, like the picture of the rabbit in the snow, it allows you to override the automatic and give it more or less light, depending on what's needed. Auto exposure bracketing is a DSLR feature as well, and will let you take a series of pictures, usually from 3 stops under to 3 stops over, so then when you get them back, you can pick the best one.